Being famous is the unattainable dream for most of us. For others who have it, it can be a curse. Such is the case with famous author Paul Sheldon, who has recently finished his new novel after finally cutting ties with the romance series he wrote that made him a household name. While driving down from his mountain riding retreat during a blizzard, he gets in a bad car crash and is rescued by a charming nurse named Annie Wilkes. Annie proclaims herself to be Paul's #1 fan, and she saved him from certain death because she loves his work and she loves him. But, as Paul soon realizes, love can mean many things. And to Annie Wilkes, it's about to mean anger, threats, and a whole lot of torture. From the twisted mind of Stephen King, this is Misery. I don't like to stray too far from Stephen King in this podcast. I guess you could say I'm his #1 fan. His influence on horror is too great to put into words, and I like to shine a spotlight on his film adaptations every few episodes. Today is one of those days, and we're doing Misery, a personal favorite of mine that really makes it difficult to approach Stephen King and ask for an autograph. The whole time you're thinking, don't be Annie Wilkes, don't be Annie Wilkes. But if you're as big a fan as I am, inevitably you're going to sound creepy. And, that's par for the course with him. I'm sure he's had his fair share of freaks. This is Filmgazm. I'm Connor Eyzaguirre, and if you're with us up to now, I'm sure you know who I am and what this podcast is about. Austin is not joining me today, unfortunately, but he will be back next week. I know some of you took a gander at my review for Midsommar and were a bit surprised at what you saw. Well, frankly, so was I. I won't go too into my thoughts on Midsommar as we are going to be going in depth on it in just 2 weeks, but suffice it to say I did not like it. In fact, I thought it was a joke, and it pissed me off something fierce. Sure, I can laugh about it now, but at the time, I felt like Annie Wilkes reading the end of Misery's Child and learning that Misery was dead. I was screaming, I was throwing furniture around, I was beating the shit out of my favorite author. It was a bad night. Well, I promise you'll get to hear my full thoughts and Austin's in 2 weeks, and he disagreed with me, so get ready for some interesting banter. And speaking of Austin, next week is our 4th Weird Shit Wednesday, where we will be focusing on the legacy of the Godfather trilogy, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. Arguably some of the best films in history, with Godfather 2 being one of the only sequels to ever win Best Picture. A host of unforgettable actors and an incredible story that spans half a century. Look for it next Wednesday, July 17th. Cannot wait. Now, I got a quick rewind for you on Saw. Let me know what you make of this. So a while back, I had mentioned that the Saw franchise was going to be rebooted by Chris Rock, of all people, who claims he has a good idea to start the series from scratch. Apparently, he's a longtime fan, and he's had this idea gestating for a while. Well, it's been revealed today that Rock will also be starring in it as a cop, and Samuel L. Jackson has signed on to play his father. So already some bigger names than usual are attached to this one, but I'm disappointed we're not going to get to see the continuation of Jigsaw, which had some promise. But, I guess we'll see. Darren Lynn Bousman is attached to direct, so he's going to bring some of that classic Saw flavor to this, so who knows, it could be great. Now, let's get miserable. Misery the novel was published in 1987 by Stephen King, who got his inspiration from a number of sources, mostly his legions of psychotic fans. Now, I'm a big fan of Stephen King, but I consider myself to be a considerably sane person. I'm also a fan of Star Wars, Rick and Morty, and Game of Thrones, but I don't align myself with those psychos that comprise the fan base. The bozos who harass the actors on Twitter, or stand in line for days waiting for Szechuan sauce packets. I hate those people so much. Well, Stephen King has fans like that too, and they helped give him Misery. Not just the book, but the feeling of misery. Mostly it was their reaction to his 1984 novel, The Eyes of the Dragon. which I haven't read yet, but many fans rejected it because it was a fantasy novel, and he was known, and still is known, for horror. People didn't like this change of pace. Another source of inspiration was King's history with substance abuse. He wrote, quote, "Take the psychotic nurse in Misery, which I wrote when I was having such a tough time with dope. I knew what I was writing about. There was never any question. Annie was my drug problem, and she was my number one fan. God, she never wanted to leave." Now, his original idea had Annie wanting to kill Paul from the start, feed him to her pet pig, and use his skin to bind the new Misery novel once Paul was finished. Holy shit. When asked why he didn't go through with it, King said, quote, "It would have made a pretty good story, not such a good novel, however. No one likes to root for a guy over the course of 300 pages, only to discover that between chapters 16 and 17, the pig ate him. But that wasn't the way things eventually went. Paul Sheldon turned out to be a good deal more resourceful than I initially thought." Thank God, because that would have been a lousy ending, and in my opinion, King has always had a bit of a problem ending stories, but, that's for another time. But that would have just ruined it all. If the fucking pig ate him, oh my God. Now, Misery the film was released in 1990, has an IMDb score of 7.8, and a Rotten Tomatoes score of 90%. It was directed by Rob Reiner, who was chosen specifically by Stephen King because he did such great work on 1986's Stand By Me, a drama that was based on King's novella The Body, which can be found in the Different Seasons collection. Reiner is also the director of The Princess Bride, This Is Spinal Tap, When Harry Met Sally, and A Few Good Men, just to name some of his bigger hits. The film stars Oscar nominee James Caan as writer Paul Sheldon. Caan was nominated only once for his role as Sonny Corleone in 1972's The Godfather. What are the odds? We'll learn all about Sonny Corleone next week. The psychotic Annie Wilkes is played by Oscar winner Kathy Bates, who won her first Oscar for this film, and it was well-deserved. Not well-reserved. She's one of the only actors to win for a horror film, some of the others being Ruth Gordon for Rosemary's Baby, which we've covered in great detail in the past, Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster for The Silence of the Lambs, which we've also covered in great detail in the past, and Frederick March for 1931's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which we have not talked about. Bates was also nominated 2 more times for 1998's Primary Colors and 2002's About Schmidt. She's also garnered some TV attention for her roles on, I think, more than at least 2 or 3 seasons of American Horror Story on FX. Not a fan personally, but I heard she was very good. The supporting cast of Misery is pretty spectacular as well, with Oscar nominee Richard Farnsworth playing Buster, the local cop who's trying to find Paul Sheldon on the outsides of the story. Farnsworth was nominated for his roles in 1978's Comes a Horseman and 1999's The Straight Story, which made him the oldest man ever nominated for Best Actor at age 79. He died in 2000 of a self-inflicted gunshot wound after learning he had terminal cancer. Paul Sheldon's agent, Marcia Sindel, is played by Oscar nominee and Hollywood icon Lauren Bacall, who was nominated for her role in 1996's The Mirror Has Two Faces. In addition to being married to Humphrey Bogart once upon a time, Bacall had over 73 acting credits and continued working until her death in 2014 of a stroke, the very same day after Robin Williams died. It was a very sad week for film fans. Misery follows famed writer Paul Sheldon, who has made a living with his series of Misery novels, a romance series that he doesn't feel challenges him enough. Upon finishing his new novel, which is un-Misery related, he gets in a bad car crash and is saved by Annie Wilkes, a nurse who is enamored by him and his work. At first, she seems sweet and innocent, having bought Paul's new Misery novel, Misery's Child, and is gushing over every word. Everything's going smoothly until she turns on him once she learns that he's killed off Misery Chastain, his lead character, in his most recent novel. This is a scene where we get to see just how insane Annie truly is. We've gotten hints up to that point, like when she flips out over Paul's use of vulgar language in his new book, but nothing like this. She freaks out, she's throwing furniture around, she's saying, "You killed her, you killed her!" It's insane. And in this scene, she confesses that she never called the hospital or his agent and reminds Paul that nobody knows he's there. Creepy shit. Annie then forces Paul to burn his new non-misery novel and makes him a nifty little writing station so he can write a new book and bring misery back to life. And she implies that if he doesn't do this, she is going to kill him. Throughout all this, Paul is working out his arms and legs in secret so he can fight off Annie when the time comes and get to safety. Paul goes exploring while Annie is out and finds a scrapbook detailing who Annie really is. She's an ex-nurse responsible for the deaths of over a dozen children, but the trial fell apart due to lack of evidence. But the newspaper clipping she saved about the investigation says all that Paul needs to know. She's crazy, she's killed, and she's unstable. Later, Annie drugs Paul and straps him to his bed in his sleep. When he wakes up, Annie says that she knows he's been out of his room, and in order to prevent him from escaping again, she breaks both his ankles with a sledgehammer. Ugh! It's easily the most cringe-inducing scene in the movie. It's horrifying to watch. It's just, oh god. And it's actually a lot tamer than the novel. In the novel, she actually cuts off one of his feet instead. So it's tamer, but it's still really difficult to watch. It's the scene that most people remember from this movie. Now, meanwhile, Buster, the local sheriff, has been investigating Paul's disappearance, and some good old-fashioned sleuthing leads him to Annie Wilkes. After looking around for a bit in Annie's house, he finds Paul in the basement, but before he can do anything, Annie blasts him from behind with a shotgun and kills Buster instantly. Oh, so sad. You think, oh, he found him. But nope. Boom. She then tells Paul that they have to die together because that's what God would wanted. It's really, her logic is so fucked up. Now, Paul, willing to say anything to buy himself more time, says he agrees and he will die with Annie on one condition. He has to finish the new Misery novel first. And he convinces Annie and tells her that upon completing a book, he needs 3 things. A bottle of Dom Perignon, a single cigarette, and a single match. It's his ritual. Upon finishing the book, he uses the match to set it on fire right in front of Annie. And when Annie rushes to save the book, Paul bashes her head in with the heavy typewriter and a fight ensues. Paul gets the upper hand and stuffs Annie's mouth with the charred remains of the book before bashing her head in with a metal pig statue, killing her. It's so satisfying. Now in the book, Paul hides the real book away and burns a stack of blank paper to get Annie's attention. Upon escaping, he publishes the final Misery novel, and it is met with great acclaim, and Paul considers it the greatest thing he's ever written. I like this ending more, but only because the idea of losing an entire unpublished novel in any way scares the shit out of me, because it actually has happened to me before personally. I've been a writer since high school, and one time, due to a corrupt flash drive, I lost about half of a book that I'd written, and I had to somehow rewrite it, knowing it would never be the same. It was a terrible feeling. But, in Paul's case, I can understand wanting to destroy something that represents the most terrifying few weeks of his life. That book is pure evil because of why it had to come about. The film ends with an 18-month time jump, where Paul is now walking with a cane, and he meets his agent for lunch. He's written a new non-misery novel, and it's being met with great critical acclaim. He has a hallucination of Annie coming at him with a knife, just as his agent suggests writing a non-fiction story about his time with her. The hallucination turns out to be a lady with the dessert tray, who confesses to Paul that she's his biggest fan. Paul smiles awkwardly and thanks her. That phrase is going to have new meaning for him forever. And that's Misery, the nightmare of everyone who's ever been famous. It's a fantastic film that I will give a definite 9 out of 10. It gets better every time I watch it. I love it. And here's some Filmgazm facts for you. Number 1. Jack Nicholson was offered the role of Paul Sheldon, but passed because he was not sure he wanted to do another movie based on one of Stephen King's novels after what he had experienced with Stanley Kubrick on The Shining. And we talked about that way back in the first episode. Yeah, a lot of people went through some shit on The Shining. Number 2. Misery was almost turned into a Broadway play with Julia Roberts as Annie Wilkes. King vetoed the idea because Annie is, in his words, a brawny woman who can sling a guy around, not a pixie. I agree with this. Julia Roberts would have been a terrible choice. Number 3. When Paul's car is found, he is assumed to be dead in a subplot original to the film. Coincidentally, on June 19th, 1999, author Stephen King was hit by a car with some initial reports saying he had died. King eventually incorporated the accident into his book, The Dark Tower 7, The Dark Tower, which also briefly mentioned Annie Wilkes. I read this novel. I read the whole Dark Tower series. I thought it was great. It is weird that Stephen King put himself into the final book as kind of like the creator, and the main characters, Roland and Jake and Eddie, have to stop Stephen King from getting hit by the van. It's weird, it's meta, and that actually did happen, and King remarkably survived that ordeal. It's incredible that he made it through that. He later bought the guy's van and destroyed it with a crowbar, Office Space style, because that's what I would do. If I'd been almost hit by a car, I would destroy that car. But, yeah, he hated the guy, which I get. I mean, that's hard to forgive. And unfortunately, he did end up rushing the end of the Dark Tower because he started to fear death. Anyway, number 4. Kathy Bates was reportedly disappointed that a scene was cut in which she kills a young police officer by rolling over him repeatedly with a lawnmower. Director Rob Reiner was afraid that the audience would laugh at it, and I don't know how I would feel about that. I mean, after everything Annie's already done, could it get, I don't know, more evil, wacky? I don't know. Lawnmower seems a bit much, but we never, scene was cut. We'll never get to see that. Misery remains a horror classic for the hobbling scene alone, but the performances and the great script by William Goldman help this adaptation stand apart from others. You can tell the work and care was put into it, and they wanted to make the best version possible, and I love that. Another fun fact, Annie Wilkes will be appearing in the upcoming second season of Hulu's Castle Rock. She'll be played by Lizzie Kaplan, famous for her role of Virginia Johnson in the Showtime series Masters of Sex, which ran from 2013 to 2016. She also appeared in The Interview and The Disaster Artist. I can't wait for that one. It's going to be really cool. Now, let's leave Stephen King a bit to take a look at what happened this week in film. 2 awesome trailers were released. First off, the upcoming whodunit murder mystery Knives Out, starring Daniel Craig, Chris Evans, Jamie Lee Curtis, Toni Collette, Don Johnson, Michael Shannon, Lakeith Stanfield, and Christopher Plummer, among others. It's directed by Rian Johnson, who desperately needs to gain some goodwill with moviegoers after Star Wars The Last Jedi, and this looks like the film to do it. It looks really funny, really entertaining, and it's got an incredible ensemble. And secondly, during the final of the Women's World Cup, Disney released the teaser for their upcoming live-action remake of Mulan, and it looks way more serious than I expected. Apparently, they're ditching the songs and Mushu the Dragon in favor of a PG war film about family, duty, and honor that stars an all-Chinese cast. I'm very intrigued. I think it's going to be great. I think it's going to be a little heavy-handed, but I'm willing to give it a shot. They've been pretty on point so far with their live-action movies. Next, It director Andy Muschietti is being courted to direct The Flash for DC Comics, which will star Ezra Miller as Barry Allen, and I guess it'll continue where 2017's Justice League left off, despite nobody really caring. Frankly, I think they should just either leave it and let the CW series do its thing, or do a soft reboot and don't even acknowledge the DCEU. It worked for Aquaman and Shazam, it'll work for The Flash. I'm honestly surprised they're keeping Ezra Miller after Justice League. I mean, Aquaman I get because it was already, set. But I don't know. I mean, I love The Flash. I really have learned to lower my expectations when it comes to DC Comics movies. I'm looking forward to Todd Phillips' Joker, but I am going to, keep my guard up. Same with The Flash. Next up, relatively unknown singer Halle Bailey has landed the role of Ariel in Disney's upcoming live-action Little Mermaid remake. And crazy people are up in arms. Holy shit, the unwarranted controversy that blew out of this. Apparently they're pissed because Halle Bailey is black, and she's playing Ariel the Mermaid, who is depicted as a white redhead in the Disney film. Frankly, I don't give a shit, and I'm going to wait to see the movie before I start judging the 19-year-old singer on her mermaid skills. And I think the rest of you should do that as well. This is unbelievable. It's not a, it's not a biopic. It's a movie about a mermaid. It's all chill. Jesus Christ. Next up, film composer Sid Raymond died at age 100 of natural causes. His big Oscar win came from his musical score for 1961's West Side Story. That was his big claim to fame. Next up, comedian Artie Johnson died at age 90 of heart failure. He was an Emmy-winning comedian who was known for his role on NBC's Laugh-In, a sketch comedy series that lasted from 1967 to 1973, where he was a regular performer. It was kind of a precursor to Saturday Night Live. Next up, and this was really sad, a tragic, sudden death. Disney star Cameron Boyce died suddenly at age 20 of a seizure related to health problems that he was suffering. Boyce was known for his role on Disney's Descendants film series, which focused on the children of famous Disney villains like Maleficent, Cruella de Vil, Captain Hook. And any death is tragic, but to lose someone that young hurts particularly bad, and my heart goes out to his family and his friends and his co-stars, and this was just such a loss. Next up, I found this one pretty interesting. Christopher Lloyd briefly expressed his interest in finally doing Back to the Future Part 4, and he dropped the idea that climate change would be involved somehow, Doc Brown being a scientist and climate change being the dominant scientific problem that's facing our world today, despite many conservatives telling you otherwise. It's real, folks. We got to deal with it. He said he'd only do Back to the Future 4 if Michael J. Fox, Robert Zemeckis, and Bob Gale were all on board too. Back to the Future is my favorite movie, but I'm not holding my breath on this. Zemeckis and Gale have said many times that a fourth Back to the Future is not happening, and maybe that's for the best. They did that Back to the Future game a few years ago that was basically what they would have done for Back to the Future 4, and that was fantastic. Everyone's getting way too old to the point where it's just going to be sad, and I don't want them spoiling it. 1 through 3 are just flawless, great movies, and I love it. Next, Charlize Theron and Helen Mirren will be returning to the world of fast cars and furious drivers for 2020's Fast and Furious 9, which will not be starring Dwayne Johnson or Jason Statham, who have smartly jumped ship to do their own thing. 2019's Hobbs and Shaw, set for release on August 2nd. Frankly, without the two of them, I doubt I'll even bother with this one, because let's be honest, for a long time now, nobody has been watching the Fast and Furious series for Vin Diesel. The film franchise got a massive boost when Dwayne Johnson joined it, and then Jason Statham joined it, and then Paul Walker died, and I think the films are fun to watch, but I think that they've been getting a bit of a pass lately, and I think they're finally going to flop again with this one. I think Hobbs and Shaw is going to be successful because Dwayne Johnson rarely fails at the box office. Guys just, what they call him, franchise Viagra. There's something to that. Finally, John Turturro has been working on a spin-off of The Big Lebowski, focusing on his character of Jesus Quintana, and it finally has an official title. The Jesus Rolls will hit theaters in 2020 and co-stars Susan Sarandon, J.B. Smoove, Audrey Tautou, and Pete Davidson. And it's directed by Turturro. It's going to be weird, and I guess we're all just going to have to forget that our new hero, Jesus Quintana, is a fucking pederast, according to Walter Sobchak. Remember? He had to go door to door, tell people he was a pedophile, did 6 months in Chino for exposing himself to an 8-year-old. Let's never forget that. I love that movie. Well, thank you for joining me, you dirty birds. Misery is a creepy story made possible by a flawless performance from Kathy Bates that earned her a rightly deserved Oscar. The film is great, the book is great, and y'all should check it out. Certainly worth your time. Next week is Weird Shit Wednesday once again, and The Godfather will be our main course. And it's a 3-course meal, so come hungry. In the meantime, feel free to reach out to us via Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or email if you want to leave us a question or a comment or a suggestion. Please subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Podbean, or YouTube, or all three if you want to be our number one fan. Remember, if you're a writer, always stay true to yourself rather than try to please everyone. It's not possible. But also, keep your guard up whenever someone calls themselves your number one fan.